welcome to On Trial, starring Mark Radulich, also starring Sean Comer. Hope you're ready, Hollywood, because you're on trial.
All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Harry T. Stone presiding. This is On Trial, your favorite debate podcast. We take the north side, we take the south side of any given movie IP, such as it is, and we defend it, we prosecute it, and then we take it out back and we shoot it. Tonight, I am your defending attorney, Mr. Mark Radulich, and on the docket is the 1984 film Supergirl, which is being charged with being a silly, silly movie. How silly is it? Is it silly, 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 or just plain silly? We'll find out on this episode of On Trial. And prosecuting this turkey, straight from the planet Krypton, ladies and gentlemen, yours and mine, Superman. Here he is, folks. He's Sean. You're not.
You know how much you have to hate yourself to try to defend this movie.
Can I tell you how my daughter and I watch this together? So she's at an age now where I can show her more stuff, and she actually will sit and absorb it. Now, look, we've heard the stories. Anyone who listens to my podcast knows about the little feminist that is Lily Radulich. Even she was like, "This is garbage. Holy cow!" Just to give you an example of the kinds of things we'll be talking about tonight, when she goes into the water and comes up bone dry, even my daughter looked at me and was like, "Why is she dry? What's going on? Why is this movie so stupid? What are you doing to me? Why can't I be in my room watching Bunked?"
The day you introduce Lily to Lindsay Ellis, that we should do like a live reaction to, so I can actually hear her discover her spirit animal.
All right, Sean. Let me ask you, so before you had to rewatch it for the show tonight, when was the last time you saw this piece of garbage?
I'm not sure I had ever watched it in its entirety. I was only familiar with it by reputation.
Oh, okay.
I remembered seeing it in the video stores of yore when I was growing up, and always kind of going, someone once made a Supergirl movie, and yet never got around to watching it. I think it was because I was never, as comics went, the biggest Superman fan growing up.
Sure.
So it's kind of precious few fucks were given. But I did eventually reach an age where I was kind of dumbfounded that Supergirl got a full-length theatrical release before someone could develop a proper Batman movie. Or Green Lantern, or Wonder Woman, Green Arrow,
The
Flash, Martian fucking Manhunter,
Zatanna,
the Teen Titans. Name just about anybody else. I was always a little bit gobsmacked that was the next go-to DC property for the Salkins was fucking Supergirl.
Well, have you ever? I mean, it makes sense when you look at the purchase history of the Superman IP. Have you ever actually sat and read the Wikipedia for the Superman movie franchise? Somebody, I recently told Chris Sheehan that if I had one wish outside of personal health and prosperity for my family, it's that I want to pitch a movie to a Hollywood producer and see it through to its completion. And I had a couple of different ideas. Now I'm changing my answer to I want to pitch the history of the Superman franchise as a movie, because the Salkins and what they did to this thing over the pinball machine. I've used that reference a lot lately. And then what Warner Brothers did to this thing over the years, and the amount of people they've had come in and write scripts, and of course Kevin Smith's story about Superman Lives or Superman Reborn or whatever it was called. I think it was Superman
Oh,
Lives.
God, the John Peters story?
Yeah, like, all of these stories of how horribly mistreated this IP has been from Superman, from Superman 2, with what happened to Richard Donner, all the way to Justice League. It's a hell of a story, man. And in many ways better than any given film in this entire franchise.
It really is. It's just it's just astounding that here you've got DC's flagship character, and yet you've never seen so many supposedly capable, talented, borderline brilliant people be handed so many years, so many decades of epic, unforgettable, formative stories by some of the names upon names of the comics world. And we have gotten two indisputably good movies out of fucking, what, 7, 8?
In defense of the Superman on celluloid franchise, they've done much better on television. You had
far and away. Yeah. Lois and Clark was a huge hit. Dean Cain being a douchebag notwithstanding. Supergirl has, for all my issues with it, far exceeded expectations. There was even Smallville, which for about half or so of its run was an outstanding Superman show, and for the other half was, well, it was a CW primetime teen sitcom.
I was going to say, without Smallgirl, you probably don't have the Arrowverse.
Well, no, you definitely don't have Arrow. And there was even, when I was growing up, briefly a Superboy TV series that was actually relatively well received, except for the fact that the lead actor was a very naughty boy, and there wasn't much reconciling it in the headlines.
And then you have all the cartoons, the Adventures of Superman that came after the Batman animated. Yeah. You know, you have that. You have Justice League, which bled into Justice League Unlimited, which
the Timberverse,
which set the high bar for DC cartoons, whether it be direct-to-video or after-school properties or whatever. And even and look, I'm not gonna fault it. Even the old like Super Friends had their charms.
Yeah. I mean, it's in a quirky look where they actually started from, ain't it cute sense.
Sure.
It wasn't the best storytelling.
No, but it was also like the 60s.
Yeah, it has a certain cheesy, endearing innocence about it that's very much in line with the DC of the era. And you know, that ties into why I'm going to end up cutting Supergirl just a small modicum of slack. But you almost want to sit everyone from Helen Slater downward involved with this movie down and just speak to them almost as if they were 9 and just say, "Honey, did you read a Supergirl comic before you made this?"
No, look.
The
Salkins didn't give a shit about the comic books. Let's not mince words here, sir. Let us not start off on the wrong foot. Jean Schwach, whoever directed this thing, this Frenchy Frenchman, David Odell, the Salkins didn't give two shits and a fuck about the Superman comic books.
They really didn't. They didn't, which is so sad because for Superman 2, they took what you could almost consider almost a deep cut DC villain. Maybe not to Superman fans specifically, but to like non-comic fans who weren't as familiar with the DC universe, they took a fairly deep-cut villain and really did him pretty fucking well.
You're talking about Zod.
Zod, yes.
Okay.
I mean, and again, since I can already hear Mr. Actual Lee out there already screaming into the ether. Again, when I say deep cut, I'm talking the villains to where you could talk to somebody who's not a dyed-in-the-wool comic fan, who isn't patently familiar with the universe. You bring up the name, and they're going to say, huh? You can go to someone who hasn't been reading Batman comics for years on end, who doesn't have the Caped Crusader standing tall on their schlong as a penile tattoo, and you can say the name Joker or Riddler or Penguin. Chances are they're going to know who those characters are.
Well, let's be serious about this, though. Most people know Catwoman, Joker, Riddler, Penguin because of the '66 Batman show, which was aired in prime time.
Sure, yeah, and that's one of the tough things about Superman is you look at his key villains, and you kind of blew your load with the biggest baddie of them all, kind of right from the beginning in the first movie. Because obviously it's going to be Lex Luthor. He's the one that makes the most sense, but he's also the headliner, the showstopper, the main event. Because God knows at this time we fucking sure didn't have the budget to do Darkseid properly.
No, could you imagine? I mean,
oh God, I don't want to. I'm serious. That wasn't me being sarcastic. I'm glad they didn't try to do Darkseid
in 1983
because it would have been embarrassing.
And I don't want to dig too much if this is part of your notes part of the show, but I want to take this time to say this. So Superman 3, the initial idea was Brainiac, Supergirl, and Mr. Mxyzptlk. And can I just say that we were utterly robbed of the possibility of Richard Pryor as Mr. Mxyzptlk? Could you imagine?
We were. Yeah.
He was the Wiz, motherfucker. The Wiz. I prefer blue.
Who I do believe would later be played by who in Supergirl? I believe it was it Darren Criss, or am I thinking of another villain? I know Darren Criss played somebody.
Oh, you're talking about on the Supergirl show.
Yes.
With Thomas Lennon was the one in the most recent iteration. And then, I don't remember who did him as the hunky Mr. Mxyzptlk.
God, I'm trying to remember.
I'll look it up. I'll look it up. You keep talking.
Yeah. And even if you go among Marvel villains, it's the same deal. There are going to be some villains that you can just kind of throw out there, and it's going to be fairly recognizable. Magneto, Green Goblin, if we're talking Spider-Man, villains like that, and I'm losing track of where I was going with this.
Peter Gadio. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He was in Once Upon a Time in Wonderland as Cyrus.
Mm-hmm.
To answer your question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did get it mixed up. And yes, Darren Criss played somebody else. He played the one who forced Kara and Barry into the contrived musical episode.
He's so mean. I love that episode. Darren Criss The last couple of things he's done was he was in Superman Man of Tomorrow, or going to be in Superman Man of Tomorrow. He's been in... Oh, he was just in Hollywood. Did you watch that?
No, I didn't.
Okay. He was also in American Crime Story, The Assassination of Gianni Versace as Andrew Cunanan. Whoa! Hui! And what you're thinking of is he's Music Meister in Supergirl.
Music Meister. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. I was trying to remember the name. Anyway, no, I know what I was getting at. The point I was trying to get at is that I'm willing to cut him some slack because up to this point, I was trying to get at that there wasn't a whole lot of the deep established lore, kind of like we have now. Supergirl didn't exactly have the most exposure of the entire DC universe.
Yeah, Alexis and I said Supergirl's most famous feat at the time any of this was going on, quite possibly, was dying in Crisis on Infinite Earths.
I'm almost one to deny it if you ever accuse me of saying this, but yes, Alexis would be right. That was kind of what she was best known for, and she's experienced kind of a little bit of a renaissance since then, due in no small part to the CW series, and also being a big featured character in Injustice 2 and getting some more visibility in the animated properties. But just it's so weird to see, everything that these people had at their disposal in terms of elements they could have introduced to this franchise and things they could have done right, and this was what they settled for.
Yeah, here's the problem. I think for the longest time, film people were film people and comic book people were comic book people, and everybody kind of looks down on comic book people. They write funny books for children. Now comic books are responsible for $1 million toy industry items like Transformers and G.I. Joe. I've been watching a lot of the toys that made us, and almost every successful toy launch was launched because of a comic book. Now, granted, they had the idea, fed it to comic book people fed back, so that the kids, read the books, and then boom, there's toys on the shelves. And I get that. But what I'm saying is, there's all this disrespect from the film community, in the 70s and 80s, and so they're given these comic book properties, and it's like, well, we don't want to do too comic booky because we're going for a wider audience, without realizing that your wider audience is comic book fans. And I think that's where a lot of stuff gets lost.
Okay, are you ready for me to say something that's probably going to kind of piss you off, and I am prepared for you to tell me I'm wrong, and I encourage you to?
You're going to make fun of me?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Oh, good.
I'm prepared to say that to a certain point, I can understand why studios felt the way they did.
Oh, I would not get pissed
because
when
you're talking about the early 80s, you're not that far removed from the Silver Age.
Right.
When comics were epically silly. When, they created colorful, beloved characters that endured for generations, but they weren't really telling great stories.
Right.
It was still a time when you could sandwich 2 Green Lantern stories into one issue.
And I think alongside of that is you got to remember the 70s is the golden age of film. Film as art. This is your Deer Hunters, your Dog Day, and I might be off on my years, but the very early 81, 82, 83, and then the entire previous decade of the 70s.
Right.
You have these art, the height of art house cinema.
Right. And by the early 80s, I think you could kind of argue that Spider-Man and X-Men were probably both telling the most fleshed out stories. And making the greatest strides towards richly developing characters, and even sometimes weaving in more than their share of subtext, especially if you're talking about X-Men, which was one giant civil rights movement allegory right from the get-go.
Right.
But by this point, we were only beginning to enter the time of, well, like you mentioned, Crisis on Infinite Earths. There had never been a comic event like that up to that time, both in terms of the scope of its story and sometimes the gravitas that it wove into that. Keep in mind, Supergirl was not the only DC mainstay that got killed off. That was also the death of Barry Allen, which was something that DC held to for more than 20 years until Jeff Johns came along and said, I think I can bring him back, and I think I can bring him back and have it make sense. I'm not sure if The Killing Joke had been published by this time. I do believe I was in second grade when DC took a reader vote to decide if fucking Jason Todd was going to die.
Yeah, I'm going to look up Killing Joke and Death in the Family for you, but that's the mid-'80s.
Yeah, and, you can also probably throw in a lot of the great Superman stories in there, too. This was when comics were only beginning to make genuine efforts at telling big, intriguing stories rather than just being basically extended comic strips. So they maybe didn't have as much to work with in terms of, hey, this is such a fantastic story. I bet it would make a great movie, and not just a great movie, but something that could be taken seriously as an artistic film.
So Killing Joke is 88,
as
by the
real
way.
storytelling.
Killing Joke is
okay.
88.
Yeah, so it would come. Yeah, okay, so it would come along 4 years after Supergirl.
And then Death in the Family is also 88.
Okay, so that same year, you have the stories that paralyzed Barbara Gordon and murdered Robin.
Yes, because of the bloodlust of DC fans and their hatred for Jason Todd.
Yeah, the kinds of stories that we look at now, and we think, Jesus, take this and adapt it, bring it to another medium, and kind of add more color and whole new dimensions to it.
Right.
There hadn't been that many stories quite like that by that time. So while it might seem insulting, we have to look back and think that comics had not yet reached that point where they were our modern mythology, where, they were our parables, our fables, our allegories
The other thing
that we could sometimes teach powerful lessons.
Right. The other thing you have to remember about film at this time that was dealing at this level of fantasy was everybody was tripping over themselves to make Star Wars. Like Star Wars hits in 77, again, the golden age of film, and you in short order you get like Flash Gordon, and you get like Time Bandits, and you get all kinds of crazy people like Time Bandits. It's the one I could think of right now. But you get all kinds of crazy sci-fi and sci-fi fantasy, sci-fi and just plain old good old-fashioned fantasy that come roaring out of the 80s. These are the early Conan movies. You get Conan the Barbarian, and then it's much more ditzy popular sister, Conan the Destroyer. We love you, Grace Jones. So what I'm saying is, like, I think you have, and this is what I was speaking to before, I think you have movie executives, to your point, their only knowledge of comic books is, the funny books for children, because we hadn't gotten to the prestige stories that don't come until the mid to late 80s. But the other side of it is they're trying to capitalize on the popularity of Star Wars, which is a beast at this point, and they're like, what can we make that looks like Star Wars? They're not looking to... Weirdly enough, Superman by Richard Donner is a fucking anomaly. It is this epic...
It really is.
Christ story set in the modern age with a Christ-like figure, and that's not me doing interpretive dance here. That's right out of Donner's own mouth.
No, it's an honest to goodness hero's journey Christ story.
Right. And I think, and they couldn't even back off of Richard Donner without mucking about with this thing. And then, as I said, they weren't interested in making Superman the Academy Award winning motion picture. They were interested in making what's the next Star Wars. So that leads us to Supergirl 1984, which, if you're not going to, we need to talk about Superman 3 before we get into this. So, but I don't want to step on your toes. Okay.
No. Go for it. Recap us on Superman 3.
So, and it's the story in Superman 3 is sort of not the point here. The Salkins ended up with the property throughout all of this, and after what happened with Richard Donner in the first two Superman movies, they gave it to Richard Lester to direct, and again, they're not looking at Superman as this Christ-like, all things being equal, Zack Snyder tried with Man of Steel. He really was trying to capture the essence of the Christ-like Superman with Man of Steel. And, giving the devil his due, I think he gave it his best shot. I think he lacks as a film director, but that's a story for another day. My point is, Richard Lester comes along, and they're like, here's your budget. It's $150. Don't do anything serious, because it's 1983, and we're not a serious country where it's Reagan, it's apple pie, it's greed is good, which is not the message of that movie. That's the wrong message. It's just a whole other animal when you get to Superman 3, which is why it doesn't do well. And it is from that, because they were trying to get, the story was supposed to have, as I said before, Brainiac, Mxyzptlk, and Supergirl. And Warner Brothers was like, nope, too serious, too crazy, too expensive, make slapstick. Make Caddyshack, but Superman. Like, okay. And so they do it, and it doesn't do well, but they own the Supergirl property at this point, and they're like, well, she's just sitting around doing nothing. So why don't we do something with Supergirl and take a break from Superman? And that led us to the production notes on this movie.
All right, hang on. I got to pull it back up. It's set after Superman 3. We learned this because at one point our villain, Selina, overhears a radio conversation reminding us that Superman is on a peace-seeking... that phrase still... a brain cell withers every time I have to utter it.
He's gone back to his home planet along with Poochie.
Bingo. Mission to a far off galaxy, which kind of helps to explain away why there is no Christopher Reeve cameo anywhere to be found in this thing. Director Janos, I can't pronounce his name. I don't. Said in the Superman documentary, You Will Believe, that he believed that Supergirl might have been taken more seriously if Reeve had been involved in some way, and that he wished he could have contributed somehow other than, a publicity photo of him as Superman being hung in Linda and Lucy's shared dorm room. And Mark McClure making a fourth straight appearance in a Superman or Superman adjacent flick as Jimmy Olsen. Helen Slater, who, despite my initially guessing that she was around 30, was actually 21 at the time this released, was not the first choice to play Kara. Actually, I stand corrected. I almost kind of got my notes a little bit confuzzled there. I initially was going to say that Demi Moore tried out for the part, but no, she not only was auditioned for, but got the part. of Lucy Lane, but she bowed out thinking that Blame It on Rio was the real moneymaker.
Oh, I remember Blame It on Rio. Tits galore, John. Tits for young Marky. Blame It on Rio. One of my favorite movies as a hornball adolescent. You may continue.
Well, that's going to be an immediate rental now. That paved the way for Maureen Teefy to step in. I believe Brooke Shields was also in consideration to be cast at one point. In fact, no. You know what? My own handwriting. I can't read it sometimes. Yeah, Demi Moore and Brooke Shields both tested for Supergirl. But, Ilya and Croissant had both wanted someone unknown, so they went with Helen Slater, who made a cool $75,000. Dolly Parton passed up the role of Selena before it was handed to Faye Dunaway. God damn it, Salkins. You fuckers. You fuckers. You mentioned that the producers wanted Richard Lester to direct this. That didn't happen. He turned him down. Robert Wise also passed him up at the time. Jeannot was best known both for his work in television and for directing Jaws 2. It was a meeting with Christopher Reeve that secured him the part because Reeve liked Somewhere in Time. The Lost Rougeau brothers sought advice from Donner to iron out some of the technical aspects. Most of this was shot on a soundstage at Pinewood Studios in London between the summer and fall of '83. So it hit theaters pretty briskly. Salkins financed it out of pocket. Warner Brothers remained involved in the production since, after all, they did own the distribution rights. And besides, Warner Communications at the time was also the parent company of DC Comics and owned all Superman and Superman family copyrights. So everything was shot, edited, and overseen under the watchful WBI. At the time, they had a July 1984 slot open, but the producers wanted it to open during the holiday season. Between that conflict and the underperformance of Superman 3, they ultimately relinquished all distribution rights for Supergirl to the Salkins. God damn it. It got a royal premiere in the United Kingdom in July 1984, so it did kind of make its date. Jerry Goldsmith did, in my opinion, a bonny good job with the score. He had been Richard Donner's initial pick for the first Superman film. I especially kind of like it. It's a very cheesy effect, but I found it kind of charming that he used synthesizers to simulate the takeoff sounds during the main theme. It brought to mind Flash Gordon and another one of my favorite spacey adventures, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai.
Yes.
Ultimately, oh God, did this thing eat shit at the box office? Critically and at the box office. 9% Rotten Tomatoes rating based on 32 reviews. Rating of 42 on Metacritic based on 12 professional reviews.
All positive reviews are related to Heather Slater's legs.
As well they should be. Because damn them some stems.
Yes, sir.
TriStar Pictures picked up Supergirl for a holiday release in November 1984. Test audiences found it way too long, at damn near 2 full hours. Correction, it was over 2 hours, and no. Okay, again, my handwriting. It had to be edited down from 135 minutes to 105 for its North American release. Didn't matter. Still tanked despite taking the #1 slot at the North American box office opening weekend. Made a whopping total of $14.3 million in North America. And this isn't even one where I can say it's got some kind of devoted, rabid cult following to it. It's just a bad fucking movie.
Yeah, no, I'm one of the few people keeping the flame alive on this one, which you can watch on HBO Max should you deign to purchase that particular streaming app. But yeah, most people, as Sean said, this is not a dear cult classic. People like looking back on and going, it's been really misjudged. It's unfairly criticized. No, everyone wishes the original film reel would burn and digital copies erased. Let us never speak of the Supergirl again.
Now, one funny thing I will point out about this, though, is that if you go back, this was the beginning of kind of a weirdly successful friendly relationship between Helen Slater and DC. Because from here, of course, this came out in 1984. 8 years later, from 1992 to 1994, she would provide the voice of Talia al Ghul on Batman the Animated Series in 4 separate episodes. Let's see. Along the way, she would then play Lara L in 3 episodes of Smallville. You've got. Let's see. She's played Eliza Danvers in a recurring role on Supergirl.
Yeah, she's Supergirl's mommy.
Yeah, she's lent her voice to Martha Kent on DC Superhero Girls, Superhero High, as well as both on television and on a web episode. She hasn't really had a half bad career, all things considered.
Yep. She recovered from this pretty well.
Yeah, in fact, looking back at her overall filmography, I was kind of surprised at just the sheer scope of some of the things that she's been in.
Hey, you can survive a bad picture. You just, I think for most actors and actresses, what they learn is when you're in a bomb, when you're in a turkey, you'll still get work. You might not get anything starring. You might not get anything particularly challenging, but those are your yes years. You just say yes to everything. You become a working actor. You're not a star. You're just sharpening your chops, and then eventually you dig yourself out of a hole because you become you're known as dependable. You're known as somebody who does a good job and shows up to the studio, isn't a problem child. And then eventually, if you're lucky, you start getting those big time leading roles again. But you gotta say a lot of yeses and eat a lot of poo to get yourself back to that point. After a dog like this.
All right, so plot rundown.
All right, such as it
plot
is.
Rundown.
Yeah.
what the plot that we're settling for?
Yeah. All right, so our titular hero, Kara Zor-El, lives on Argo City, which is in a pocket dimension of transdimensional space, don't you know? Peter O'Toole showed up drunk And they said, "You're Zoltar," and he said, "Okay," and then proceeds to drunkenly yell out dialogue, which leads to a device called the Omega Hedron, which is blown out into space like you do. And so, after hearing her parents' opinion of her and the wariness therein, Kara says, "I'm going to redeem myself in the eyes of my fellow Argonians by going to Earth and saving the Omega Hedron, which is the battery that brings life to Argo City." And so, on the trip from Argo City to Earth, she takes in the sun's rays, like you do, and she becomes Supergirl. Now, the Omega Hedron, you see, is recovered by a would-be witch. Her name is Selena, and she is, of course, played by Faye Dunaway, who said yes to this, saw the script, and was like, "I'm going to act the shit out of this movie. I'm going to act so hard, the sets will break."
It's what I like to call the Rowdy Roddy Piper approach to acting.
Yeah.
Because about nine out of the 10 movies that Roddy was in were just utter shit, and you could tell that Roddy, being a relatively intelligent man, knew it, but he just decided more or less that he was going to take. Okay, as long as we're piling on the wrestling references, he was going to take the Shawn Michaels versus Hulk Hogan approach.
Yeah.
God damn it! I'm just going to go out here and amuse myself for a few hours.
Yeah. So,
at least I'm going to have fun.
So Faye Dunaway plays a witch who can't cast spells, and she's under the thumb of what's the actor's name? Peter Cook, who's a bumbling and a stumbling through this movie. And she gets the Omega Hedron and like, oh, this thing actually gives me powers. I can finally come out from under the thumb of the warlock, Nigel. Nigel the Warlock. Nigel the Warlock, don't you know? So she has a sidekick who's really the best character in this entire movie. Brenda Vaccaro as Bianca, who has some of the best comedy in this pile of crap. Anyway, so Selena lands on Earth. She discovers she has powers. As we said before, she dives. She falls into a lake. She comes out of the lake as Supergirl, and one of her many powers as Supergirl, comes out of the Superman 3 and 4 potluck of powers that they just give these characters. One of which is to not be at all wet when doused in lake water. But my daughter's favorite, and this happens next, my daughter's favorite Supergirl power. Now, this is right up there with Superman shoots lasers at the Great Wall of China and immediately puts it back together again. That power, that historical power that Superman's always had. Well, Supergirl, not to be outdone, has the power of instant fashion, you see. She walks behind a tree. Now, look, we've all seen Superman who's got his uniform underneath his clothes, and he goes into the phone book, he does a spinneroonie, and his suit goes somewhere up his ass. We don't know. He's Superman. He's got a super ass, is what I'm trying to tell you. And that's where he hides his pants. Anyway, doesn't matter. He spins in the phone. Oh my! He spins in the phone booth. He's out of the suit and he's into his Superman jumper, and off he goes to pick planes out of the sky that are falling. Well, Supergirl, not to be outdone, walks behind a tree and is not only instantly in brand new clothes she didn't have before at all, that she was able to just instantly invent new fashion from out of thin air. My daughter just stuck her head in. I love this.
This is really my favorite.
That's it. That was her favorite part. But she can also...
She also dyed her goddamn hair.
God damn it, you beat me to it. Yes, she's all of a sudden instantly brunette, putting stylists and beauticians out of business far and wide. Damn you, Supergirl. She does this throughout the motion picture. Just literally sees other students in their uniform and goes, yes, walks behind a tree and is one of them, and she walks amongst them. Anywho, so she goes undercover, okay? Somehow or other, it's not really explained at all in the movie, but her plan is she's going to go undercover as an ill-defined student. Because I can't tell if this is high school or college. If it's high school, there's a bit of statutory going on here, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But if it's college, okay, fine, people are of the appropriate age to be dating an old as fuck landscaper. But again, we'll get to that in a moment. So she gets herself enrolled in this school. This is where she meets Lucy Lane, who is the sister of Lois Lane. And you get a lot... For the next 97 hours, she's just going through... well, she's supposed to be looking for the Omega Hedron. She's just making her way in school. She takes notice of the hunky landscaper, who is Hart Bachner, who plays Ethan. And Selena also takes notice of him, and she uses the Omega Hedron to make him fall instantly in love with her. Because what really does a woman want in this world? Does she want power? No, she wants penis. That's what she wants. And only that. According to this movie. The affections of a man, don't you understand? So she uses the Omega Hedron to try to make him fall in love with her. But like a Three's Company episode, shit happens, and he instantly falls in love with Supergirl. Like you do. Well, he actually falls in love with her alter ego. God, what does she call herself? Linda Lee. That's it. Okay? So she takes on the identity of Linda Lee, like her cousin took on the identity of Clark Kent. And again, Selena uses the Omega Hedron to try to make Ethan fall in love with her. It fails. He ends up falling in love with Linda Lee. And so, after a Superman 3-esque scene of domino effect destruction, where it's like a Rube Goldberg machine, where everything's just falling into each other and knocking things over, and the best part of this entire movie, she makes a crane come to life, and it just runs wild over the city.
Oh, God!
It's the best part of the whole movie. I honestly wanted to turn it off after that. I'm like, it's not getting any better than this. She goes to fight Selena, but it's a trap, don't you see? It's all a trap. It's a big ruse. And Selena takes over Ethan's mind, and he makes him her slave. Now, this is a PG movie, so it's not a sex slave, but it's heavily implied. Meanwhile, Supergirl runs headlong into what? Our favorite space LP, the Phantom Zone. And I don't know how Selena got a hold of the space LP, but she did. And Supergirl runs headlong into it, like you do, and off she flies into space, and she lands on this planet in the Phantom Zone. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, Sean, but that wasn't tar she fell into. That wasn't quicksand. That wasn't muddy waters. That wasn't Dagobah. That wasn't a Dagobah. It was in fact lava she fell into, and she has no powers. And if anyone should doubt Heather Slater's acting ability, watch her take a face bump in this scene. It's glorious. So, this poor girl, she has no powers, and there's where she finds old drunkie, Peter O'Toole, Zaltar, who punished himself for losing the Omega Hedron and sent himself into the Phantom Zone like you do. And together, they climb Mount Doom and to try to get out of the Phantom Zone. There's a portal, I guess, at the top of it. And and because Peter O'Toole has had one too many dry martinis, my loves, he sacrifices himself and gives his essence, his life essence, into Supergirl, who takes that power, and she's able to get out of the Phantom Zone, which coincidentally goes through a mirror at Selena's cave apartment that she lives in. And so we have our final confrontation, Supergirl versus Selena, round 2, and Yoda speaks to her from the grave, good old Zaltar, who who says, Selena summons some sort of demon, I think. A shadow. She summons a gigantic shadow demon, and Yoda tells Kara, get the shadow demon to attack Selena, you see? That's the trick. And so she does, and she's able to defeat Selena, and she's with the world's shittiest looking tornado effect I've ever seen. And poor Bianca goes with her. See, it's never a good idea to be the sidekick to the evil guy. You always get Iago, Bianca, all of them. They always end up going downhill with the bad guy. So Selena is able to, Kara is able to save the day. Selena and Bianca go into the Phantom Zone. Ethan gets his personality back, which was of a mop, by the way. He confesses that he knows Supergirl and Linda Lee are the same gal. And Supergirl says, yes, but you must understand, dear Ethan, I have to take the Omega Hedron back to Krypton. And so she flies away, and the credits roll, and we are all left wondering, what the hell did I just watch? Your witness.
Dear God. You can only hold so much against Helen Slater when it comes to her performance. So much of it just comes down to clearly the way that Kara Zor-El was written and for some godforsaken reason was intended to be played. She's played like she's 21 going on about 8. At times, and I do not say this lightly, because I want you to keep in mind I am the future step-parent of a high-functioning autistic teen. It's almost like she's trying to affect an insulting impression of a developmental disability when you see her for the first time. If this had been made in the 90s and we had a little gender swapperoo going on here, I could have totally seen this character being played by Adam Sandler or Pauly Shore or Rob Schneider or Carrot Top.
Or Brendan Fraser.
No.
Come on, Encino Man.
No, you know what? In Encino Man, Brendan at least had the excuse that he was a caveman. You can kind of pass that. You can kind of pass that buck off a little bit. This was more like derpy underdog hero. This was like Rob Schneider. Rob Schneider is Kara Zor-El. Derpity-dur.
They're all going to laugh at
you. And of course, the accepted comic origin for Kara is that they were both shuffled off from She was shuffled off from Krypton at the same time as Clark, with the intention being that she, being the elder of the two cousins, that when they arrived, she would look after him. Something knocked her pod off course, and she ended up arriving on Earth after,
well, after
Kal-El was all, after he was already all growed up, and a full-fledged strapping Superman, his damn self, and so, Kara always presented as the younger of the two cousins, hence why she was Supergirl. Here, we're just eschewing this entirely. We're just starting off on just right on good old, safe and sound Argo City, and Kara is just a kind of sweetly dim-witted 21-year-old, which is
dummy.
which from the start is much less interesting than other depictions where Kara maybe has a little bit of pluck, a little bit of sass to her, but is maybe sometimes a little rash, a little impulsive. Here, she's just kind of a bless her little heart idiot. There's the whole weird thing with Peter O'Toole, drunkenly screaming about what a tree is. What even? You get a good glimpse of the kinds of special effects we're working with, because the MacGuffahedron goes flying through what appears to be a sheet of wax paper, which Kara comically gets stuck against, and has to pretend that this flimsy fucking sheet is a real-life window that's actually preventing her in any way, shape, or form from being shooped out into the void. It really is hilarious to watch, believe me. And while the grown-ups are arguing, she, like Mindy in a Mindy and Buttons cartoon, just kind of ambles over into the shitty-looking space pod, gets fired off into space. We're treated to a montage of her just looking out the windows like, wow, ooh, ee. No fucking clue where she's going. And by the time... Hi, Lily.
No, that was my son.
Oh. Hi, Jonah. Jonas, sorry. I got one friend whose son is named Jonas, one whose name is Jonah. Anyway. And just by the time she gets to Earth, like Peter in the back of the Stark jet in Spider-Man Far From Home, she's already crafted the super suit, the cape, the whole 9 yards, the everything. And this is to say nothing of the comical moment where the MacGuffahedron pierces the atmosphere at what we have to assume to be escape velocity, and yet the impact it makes is barely enough to rudely spray some Grey Poupon all over poor stuffed Shere Khan's fur, which our villains, such as they were, are picnicking on in a moment that redefines mustache twirly. It's like a cut Mr. Burns and Smithers animatic watching these two in this moment. Like, holy shit! How much further do you have to go to instantly depict two people as being just privileged enough to hate with every fiber of your being, as when you introduce them, they're picnicking atop the skin of a dead tiger. Holy shit!
Hey, audience, in case you missed it, these are the bad guys.
So...
They
yes.
cut the scene where Faye Dunaway was clubbing seals.
And yes, then comes the most infamous introduction of a hero in any comic book movie ever. Kara Zor-El gleefully springing from the water dry as a fucking bone and just going full Mary Martin Peter Pan through the treetops. She arrives on Earth and I guess is already fully aware of how her powers work. That's a motherfucker of a tutorial you got on that short trip, sister. She just arrives, and she's already got the hang of the shape-shifting, the heat vision, flight, the whole ball of wax. And it deprives us of the endearing kind of entertaining journey of this stranger in a strange land kind of getting comfortable with their surroundings and learning the value of their powers and the responsibility that might come with them. No, she just kind of fully arrives in "I'ma go fuck up villainy" mode. Like right out of the box, just ready to go track down Lex's ass and just hand him his own ass whooping. That's basically the impression we get. And yeah, then there's the shape-shifting. No, honey, Martian Manhunter gonna sue you for gimmick infringement.
I can't tell you.
And also,
I cannot tell you enough.
And also,
my daughter loved that power.
And also, hopefully take one look at that little stunt, and he probably just say, "I have both questions and some notes."
My daughter we have a heavy bag in the living room that my son got for her birthday present. She kept walking past it and like, look, I'm in a new outfit. She'd walk past it again. Look, I'm in a new outfit. Look, I'm a blonde. Look, I've got red hair.
I could see it. I could see Lily doing just that. But then here's where we also come to the unevenness. They can't decide if they want Kara to actually be relatively intelligent, or if they want her to be some other movie's derpy comic relief that just kind of fell into her own picture. Because she goes from struggling to overcome wax paper on Argo City. God, please, nobody tell her about Saran wrap. Because we mere mortals struggle with that shit sometimes. To actually being sharp enough on the ball that when she goes to when she's in Danvers' office and she's trying to elaborately and off the cuff devise her cover, has the presence of mind to type up a full-length forged letter of recommendation and stuff it into just the right file cabinet. Just totally sight unseen. Just here's this masterful plot that comes to mind in a matter of moments, and she's able to carry the whole thing off without a hitch, which also brings to mind. The character's actual name is Kara Danvers. I believe up to this point that is what she had been going by in the comics. What's the point of having, stuffy old Dean Danvers and this one is Linda? Was that some shit that was changed just for the sake of changing shit? Like, what was wrong with sticking to the continuity? I don't understand. No comprendo. And I mean, most of the rest there isn't a whole lot of Supergirling going on. Until about halfway through this fucking movie, we are not getting the kids to the mall. About half of this movie, maybe a little bit more, is the kids start off on the way to the mall, and then they pop in Bookman's for a second. And then they realize they haven't eaten anything, so they stop in Whataburger, and then they get a flat tire, and so then they gotta go to Napa, the parts store.
Napa, no.
Just where's the fucking mall? Enough side trips. Get to the fucking mall before it closes. And by it, I mean the Supergirling. And by closes, I mean before I switch this shit off and make up an excuse to skip this podcast. I'm kidding. I wouldn't dream of doing that.
Aw.
But fucking shit. We get about an hour and change of a lame ass fish out of water comedy, a lame ass rom-com, I might add, complete with demonic bulldozer and that whole absurd chase. And then we get about 45 minutes of actual daring do. I'm trying to think of a superhero movie in recent memory that actually got off to this slow of a fucking start. And I'm really drawing a little bit of a blank. I mean, I'm sure if I thought about it, maybe I could come up with like a Marvel movie. Like I could see maybe an argument about Thor, seeing as how he spends most of it without his powers, but that at least has an interesting interpersonal struggle. That at least has some clearly established cosmic stakes. This is, for most of the movie, the grandest stakes of this thing are Selena trying to snag her a man. And Bianca, bless her heart, Bianca is the Otis of this movie, and I mean that in the most endearing possible way. She is how an Otis should be done. We are given no grand stakes, nothing to give a flying fuck about throughout most of this, except the wacky love potion gone awry story. I mean, there's just nothing to it. It's just one big. The fuck do I care? We don't care about Ethan, except for, as we've already stated, the somewhat skeevy attraction of the schoolgirls to him, which is not a road we should have gone down.
Mm-mm.
No, not at all. Finally, Selena starts kind of thinking big and decides to make herself her self-appointed royalty with Ethan alongside her. Yeah, there's the whole Phantom Zone contrivance right alongside the Highlander 2 shit. That is all of a sudden, with no explanation, no build-up whatsoever, we're just going to introduce the concept that Zaltar has to pass his life force to Kara in order for Kara to make it back to Earth with her powers. Oh, and by the way, this also gives him force magic. This is the Jinder Mahal winning the WWE Championship of Supergirl. It comes out of nowhere. It is absolutely not explained. Nobody walks away satisfied. I mean, the credits rolling of this movie would make the credits of this movie rolling basically AJ Styles. The thing that saved us from the stupid. I mean, there's nothing that really builds up Supergirl as necessarily a capable superheroine. By comparison, take a look at a movie like Shazam, where, yeah, you also have kind of a buffoon who has no idea the ramifications, has no concept of the ramification of the powers that he's been that he's been given. But again, by the end, he learns an appreciation for them. He has grown.
Now, this is
the hero's journey has transformed him.
No, this is an extended scavenger hunt.
Yeah. Basically, this is Supergirl. Why the fuck do we care about the MacGuffahedron again? And even then, the MacGuffahedron takes a backseat to the fucking love story. You know, and then one more forgotten plot thread to tie up, since God knows it's barely been mentioned the rest of the movie. In the end, as Kara is flying back to Argo City, the holy MacGuffahedron lights shit up all over again. The city is saved. Long after we had ceased to give a shit what had happened to Argo City. It's uneven. It's all over the place. It makes Buckaroo Banzai look like fucking Macbeth. This is a character that at the time, while she may not have been quite as established as she would become, goddamn sure deserved better. Floor's yours.
Your Honor, film, you can charge it with an overall kind of umbrella charge, or we can negotiate for lesser charges. A lot of lesser charges.
I'm listening.
We're willing to take a plea deal here.
You son of a bitch! You made me crack up moments before I was about to take a sip of my drink. Oh dear God! A second later.
This movie is terrible. We all know that. The movie knows that. When they were making the movie, they knew that. But sometimes you gotta look at the actors involved that are committed to the project. They're contracted. They've been paid. They have cars. They have mortgages. They are professionals. And gosh darn it, they're going to do their best. Except for Peter O'Toole. He was drunk. Peter O'Toole showed up on set, said, allow me to slip out of these wet tings and into a dry martini. And they shuffled him off camera when they didn't need him anymore. So aside from Peter O'Toole, let's talk about this cast. Helen Slater is the patron saint of earnest. Okay? She is humble. She is earnest. The prosecution says she comes across as dim-witted. That's not her fault. That's how this terrible character was written.
I would agree.
But Helen Slater is doing her level best to be beautiful and wonderful and earnest. And I think, for the most part, she pulls that off. She is truly trying her best to make chicken salad out of a chicken shit screenplay. Helen Slater pulls off vacant eyes better than I've seen any actress. You truly believe nothing's going on upstairs in this woman's head. And Helen Slater's not a dummy. But for some odd reason, when they were doing Venn diagrams of what characteristics would be Supergirl, I don't know why someone thought catatonic. But but let's say they weren't going with catatonic. Let's say they were going with wondrous. She's wondrous. She's curious. she's on a strange world, and she's got strange powers, and she's just gobsmacked. I think Helen Slater pulls that off pretty well. Now let's talk about Faye Dunaway. I don't think anyone would accuse Faye Dunaway of being a bad actress. And I think she's smart enough to know that this screenplay was toilet paper. But again, she's committed. I'm sure she was looking at property outside of Hollywood that she was interested in. She says, well, I can do this picture, and they're going to pay me a lot of money, and I'm Faye Dunaway, and I don't want my name to be attached to something that's hot garbage. So she does what an actress does. She's supposed to be this lip-smacking, mustache-twirly, wicked witch of the West type character. She is penis-obsessed and cocksure. And sorry, I made myself laugh on that one. And she is trying to elevate this picture through her performance. And I'll tell you, this is a boring movie. This is a terrible movie. But when she's on screen, I was mesmerized. She ate the scenery, banged the scenery, beat the scenery. The scenery yelled out the safety word. The safety word was banana. She ignored it. She hooked the scenery, she hooked it to a truck, and she took it for her ride. Faye Dunaway, I know, got a raspberry for this, because she's obviously, overacting. But in a movie that is drab and boring and utterly senseless, at least Faye Dunaway is fun to watch. And Heather Slater is pretty. And have I mentioned Hart Bochner as Ethan is a hunky piece of man meat? I mean, he's not really acting in this. He essentially does line readings like a hostage. But he's not given a lot to work with. And so, look, I'm not into dudes, but, that's a bangable man. I think we can all agree. That guy and John Cena are the two molds God's working with when he creates men. Ethan has got hot-looking 80s man written all over him. Hart Bochner, who went on to do many other projects, by the way. Nobody's career was shot to hell by this movie. And then you have Brenda Vaccaro as Bianca, who's hilarious in this. All things being equal and all things being fair, they gave her, Aunt Jackie from Roseanne one-liners in this movie, and she pulls it off. She is so funny to watch. She is Gilbert Gottfried as Iago. She's Aunt Jackie. She's every side character, and she's the best of all. She's just amazing. Peter Cook as Nigel showed up on time and wasn't drunk. So good for Peter Cook. But again, nobody would say Peter Cook can't act. So look, those are your main... And let me talk a little bit about Maureen Teefy as Lucy Lane. I mean, they wanted petulant and bratty. They got petulant and bratty. She did a great job, and this is the next thing I want to talk about. She did a great job somehow or other being knocked out inside the crane. She does a great job of being Linda Lee's buddy in this picture, which is her whole role. She's fine. Look, nobody in this movie made me feel like their performance was so bad that they didn't want to be there or was so uninteresting. The performance is the best part of this movie. And it's unfair to charge this movie with being all the way terrible when there are good to great to silly, but entertainingly silly performances in this movie. This movie is terrible as a whole. But you must not look at it as a whole. You must take individual parts of this movie and examine them and appreciate them for what they are. This movie is a paella. And the plot and the special effects and the care and all of that, that's the rice, and the rice has gone bad. The rice is terrible. It's hard, it's crunchy, it's not all the way cooked. Somebody took Uncle Ben's and chucked it in a pot, and the rice was still in the box. Okay? That's the kind of paella this movie is. But the clams, the performance, mwah! Such beautiful clams. Such wonderful, wonderful performances. Let's talk about the one or two action scenes in this. Because there's not many. But there is that crane sequence. And I point to you to Exhibit A, which is the opening credits of Superman 3. They clearly had a theme, a direction going for Superman 3. They wanted slapstick. They wanted pie in the face. And I actually showed my daughter the opening of Superman 3 because I was like, you should get the same feel in that crane sequence. And the crane sequence, at one point I'm pretty sure she saves Ethan from the crane and lets the crane keep tearing apart the town. That's not a great example of how well together cut this movie is, but it is hilarious to think about. And really, and I say this to the people who listen to this podcast and are like my dad, that I was like, you guys are too negative. He doesn't understand the concept of a debate format, apparently, when one of us has to take the negative point of view. But he complains, movies are supposed to be fun, they're supposed to be entertaining, you're supposed to have a few laughs. And laughs were had. When she saves Ethan and the crane just keeps on going and destroys this town and everyone in it, and she's busy playing kissy face on the beach with hunky man Ethan, I was dying laughing. My daughter was dying laughing. Okay? The effect of her walking behind a tree and suddenly having new clothes and a fresh hairstyle and new coloring, that she didn't have any of it before. Sean called it shape-shifting. We're going to call it instant fashion. That's hilarious. Come on. Have some fun. Loosen up. Have a drink. This movie is not begging to be taken seriously. Shit. If the people who made the movie weren't taking it seriously, why should we? So, the action sequence with the crane is fantastic. It's a lot of fun. Just more senseless destruction than in Man of Steel. It's fantastic. And it's the high point of the movie. But we have another action sequence. Now, I submit to you that nobody watching this movie was supposed to be sober when watching. I don't know if you saw the warning before the movie, but this movie is best enjoyed while imbibing spirits and smoking grass. Okay? Clearly, the special effects team were doing acid and smoking marijuana and listening to Pink Floyd's The Wall, which is the best way to experience her escape from the Phantom Zone. Okay, just put on Dark Side of the Moon when she lands in the Phantom Zone. It all lines up, just like the Wizard of Oz. Now listen, I'm not going to sit here and argue that this movie is not guilty of being a silly, silly movie. It absolutely is. But that's why it's not guilty. Because it's silly. And nobody thought this was going to be a serious movie, including the people making it. There's no way Faye Dunaway showed up and was like, I need to reel it in and give good performance here. No, she went, I need to just whip it out. Faye Dunaway said, I need to whip out my penis and hit the set with it. That's what Faye Dunaway said. Helen Slater, she was like, I'm going to show up to set. I'm going to be professional. I'm going to be earnest. I'm going to be wondrous. And nobody then thought, and we're going to win an Academy Award. They thought, we hope the children enjoy this. It's for the children, don't you understand? Because why would an adult want to watch this thing? My 9-year-old daughter watched it. She had a hoot of a good time. And that's why it's successful. That's why it's not guilty. It entertained, barely, a 9-year-old. And there's no possible way anyone involved in this movie thought they were going to do better than that. No way. Not with all the slapstick, not with all the performances, not with the bad special effects. My only real problem with this, and they tried to correct it, but, 105 minutes. It already made no sense, so they couldn't cut any more from this. The movie just moves too darn slow. You do some creative editing. You maybe throw in a few more action sequences. I mean, look, when they finally get to Supergirl versus Selena, and she's hitting her with the poles like Venom in Spider-Man 3, which was a weird thing. That's all fun. And again, at the very end, where they have their final face-off, and the demon shows up, it's best to be high, but that's also fun, especially if you're high. The last thing I'm going to tell you, and I say it all the time, but it bears repeating, film is a visual medium. Film is something to be looked at and enjoyed, and in many ways forgotten about when you're done. Heather Slater, beautiful, lovely lady. Faye Dunaway, lovely woman. Peter O'Toole, drunk. Hart Bachner, hunky. Mia Farrow, beautiful. Brenda Vaccaro, she's not a bad-looking woman, not at all. Wouldn't kick her out of the bed for eating crackers. Maureen Teefy, she has a look. What I'm trying to tell you is that it's visually an appealing movie. You can't look at this movie and, as was mentioned before, Heather Slater just whiffing about in the sky and doing flips and, just having a time and not have a smile on your face. It's all pretty actors and actresses set against some lovely scenery. Supergirl. It's a fine time to be watched and promptly forgotten about. I'll give you the last word.
You son of a bitch. I specifically told you not to go with that defense.
What?
Don't think about it too hard. It's clearly for the children. Yes, it's clearly for the children, completely with Art Bachner being sex slave tied down to an inept witch's bed. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Look, hang on. We've had this argument. The 80s children were much older.
Yeah, and the teenagers or possibly teenagers going through spontaneous insta-puberty at the site of the, hairy, kind of hunky, yeah, I'd hit that landscaper. Oh, yeah. This gets the Bill Cosby for the children seal of approval.
Well, children do say the darndest things.
I have no issue with the performances in this movie. I said that from the get-go. My issue, as I said, was with the way they were written and intended to be played.
Yeah, no, it's all garbage. There's no defending this movie.
Yeah, I will absolutely accept the plea deal on this one, because we're agreed that there's no getting this thing off scot-free. It is abjectly terrible. It's not even what I would necessarily call endearingly bad. It's not like bad enough to be torture. We're not quite up to that level, but not so much so that I would exactly whip this out for a friendly beers and bad movies night.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when we took a brief break before I started my line of defense, and I was thinking, like, it's too boring to be so bad it's good, and that's probably its worst crime, is that they just didn't lean into how garbagey this was going to be to have a ruckus good time. Instead, they just kind of made a movie, and we're like, eh.
Yeah, you know what? There's a point where your movie can be salvaged if it's at least bad enough to be memorable.
Right.
If it has to be seen to be believed bad enough, you're really fucked if your movie is just forgettably bad.
Yeah.
Because if it's the former, I might see it browsing on Tubi. I might remember I got a couple slices of leftover pizza in the fridge and a few hours before I'm going to be wound down enough to go to bed. And yeah, then I'll probably stay up and give it a watch, and might even, ring my Floridian friend up the next day and say, "You gotta see this thing. You gotta see it for yourself."
Yeah, this is no Ice Pirates.
Speaking of which, as a side note, question for you, Mark.
Yes, sir.
Somebody want to tell me where in the crispity, crunchity, peanut buttery fuck and when Tubi all of a sudden actually got some pretty damn good stuff in their selection?
I don't know.
When did Tubi get the streaming rights to Terminator?
God, did it? Wow.
And Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 and Haven. There is actually some semi-decent stuff on Tubi. The first Hellraiser is on Tubi.
And see, I told you about Tubi because that's where Swamp Thing was. Remember that?
Tubi done came up. I actually went because I saw a quick little sizzle reel of movies that were supposedly on there. Fucking Megamind is on Tubi. Like a movie that actually did relatively well.
Tubi, and new Walmart bin.
I was like, there's no way. There's no way this stuff is actually on Tubi. Oh, it's there. It's on Tubi. Tucker and Dale versus Evil is fucking on Tubi. That's a great movie.
All right, buddy. I think we're gonna go with pay a fine and probation here. We're gonna say admit guilt to being a poorly put together movie, only saved by its earnest performances. Fair enough?
Yeah, that's acceptable. I don't hate this movie enough to go after it with any more venom than I already have. It's, like I said, it's not one that I'm exactly going to sit back and make a point to rewatch at any time in the near future. It's punished enough for being regarded as the worst thing to be attached to any Superman, to the Superman cinematic legacy.
Well, no. Walk that statement back. Because Superman 4. I'll put this up against Superman 4 any day and at least enjoy the hilarity that is her, that is her walking behind a tree and suddenly coming up with a different outfit, and Faye Dunaway, acting circles around people against the ever-changing background of Superman doing the same flying motion.
That's a good point. I guess this is at least somewhat endearing in its ineptitude, and in the fact that clearly nobody who made this movie had ever even taken a cursory glance at a Supergirl comic. My suggestion instead is, if you're a huge Supergirl fan, number one, I am sure the source material crew, yes, including even Alexis, would probably be able to recommend some great books to start out on. And I would also add that for as much as I do have my issues with it, it is mostly, about 85% of the time, hard to go wrong with the CW series. The CW series really kind of took her to a whole other level, and if you're a gamer, Supergirl is a huge part of Injustice 2's story mode.
Yep, I actually watched all the cutscenes on YouTube a year or so back, and I actually really enjoyed it. Supergirl, we talked about this. Alexis and I just did a Season 5 review, but we also touched on the other seasons. Supergirl has peaked with Season 3 and the World Destroyers and Reign. Season 4, if the politics of that season don't annoy the living shit out of you, was actually kind of a fun season. So, Supergirl seasons 1 through 4 are definitely worth a binge.
See, I stress, it's not the politics themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way that they are presented.
Yeah. It was a bit pitchy, dog. All right. And with that, we shall bring this podcast to a close. The next time, we're actually going to put On Trial on the shelf for a little bit, and we're going to do a series of Long Road to Ruins. Andrew Graham woke up from, like, a drunken stupor and was like, hey, pirates! I don't know if he's been drinking rum. I don't know if he was, like, binging it on Disney+. I don't know if he's... what happened here? But he was like, hey, we never did Pirates of the Caribbean. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. So... I think I was saving it for either the next Pirates movie or a reboot, or we stopped doing the show, and by that point it was too late. Whatever this situation was, we never got around to Pirates. It's a really fun series to talk about. So we're going to do a Long Road to Ruin, him, myself, and Sean Comer on July 30th. Just in time for the new Bill and Ted's Face the Music, myself and Sean Comer will look at the first 2 Bill and Ted movies on August 20th. Towards the end of September, on the 24th, we'll look at the first 2 Kingsman movie, just in time for The King's Man, which is the prequel. And then, at the end of October, just in time for Snake Eyes, we'll be looking at the first 2 G.I. Joe movies. There's the first one with one cast, and then, like Transformers, the movie, they just kill everybody in that cast, and and then they bring on The Rock. Fantastic.
Brought on The Rock, and then the second one got conspicuously better.
Yeah. We'll be looking at, in time for No Time to Die, assuming it actually comes out, we'll be doing the Timothy Dalton Bond movies as a Long Road to Ruin on December 3rd. And then finally, before the year ends, we'll back to On Trial again. The last 2 On Trials of the year will be December 23rd, the night before Christmas Eve, and then the night before New Year's Eve, December 30th. We'll be looking at the original Dune in time for the new Dune movie. And we'll be looking at Top Gun from 1986 in time for Top Gun Maverick. So check those out when we do them and go through them. Sean, you play video games, and then you invite people to watch them.
A lot of them. Oh, yes. Well, for updates on when I'm going to be streaming at twitch.tv/ComerCodex, ComerCodex, the best way to go is to follow me on Twitter, same, at ComerCodex, and Instagram, also at ComerCodex. It's a whole branding thing I'm doing. I typically stream from 7 to 10 p.m. Central Time, although the streams may actually be getting longer in the near future, because the future Mrs. Comer is starting on overnight shifts at Amazon, and in solidarity, I am joining her in kind of taking on more of a nocturnal schedule. So streams will, depending on what we decide when we talk about it, will either be starting earlier or running a little bit later. Not sure which as of this point. Generally speaking, I tend to play a lot of Apex Legends, a lot of Overwatch, and I'm reintroducing Rainbow Six Siege, among the other occasional, wild card shooters. And I'm also diving back into story games. In fact, this weekend I am going to be finishing up the first BioShock in preparation for what will be the first edition of Long Road to Ruin gaming. Kind of untitled yet, but the gaming edition of Long Road to Ruin, which will be hosted by myself and Andrew Graham, wherein we will be revisiting various long-running and recent gaming franchises, one game per episode. And we decided that we want to start with a series that is extremely near and dear to both of our hearts. So one game at a time. We are going first to the sunken city of Rapture and then to the flying city of Columbia. So, again, I invite you all to check me out at twitch.tv/ComerCodex, especially since we also like to do a lot of fundraising. The general rule is for every $40 donated to the charity of my choice, this month it is either the Bale Project or the Trevor Project, you get to extend my stream out another hour. So if you're digging the show, drop a couple bucks to a worthy cause, and you get to see even more. Everybody wins.
Outstanding. All right, folks. Check out our other shows based on the Supergirl property this week. We did Supergirl being super. We did Supergirl Season 5 and the aforementioned previous 4 seasons we touched on. There's also the Superblog team-up. I did a commentary with my daughter. My son occasionally yelled in the background. For Flash Gordon, me and Jesse talked about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Ghostbusters, and then Jesse and Ronnie Adams talked about the toys, the games, the movies, all of it. And then there was an unspoken issues for something called Mad Dog. So check all those out. Jesse and I reviewed Lamb of God. Next week, Batwoman, The Many Arms of Death, Batwoman Season 1, and Mushroom Head. So thank you for joining us here on Trial. All rise. Court is now in recess. Be well, be safe, and behave.
Boing.